And let's begin with a little meditation as we've done, as we're studying the mind. We're going to use it. We're going to practice the getting familiar with the laboratory of the mind to try to put it into context. So sit comfortably, relax your body and mind, place your attention, place your mindfulness on the breathing in front. Your goal here is to be mindful of your respiration, letting go of all other thoughts. And with addition of some wisdom, recognizing when you're breathing in, when you're breathing out, very carefully watching the endpoints when the breath is sort of stable, not moving in or out, just at the top and bottom, where the mind might tend to like to play a little bit, multitask into other thoughts. Making a mental note of the intensity of the breathing now, its rhythm, just to compare it later when we have meditated on the nature of the mind for some time. Bring your attention away from the breathing and just investigate your mental consciousness. those of you who've listened to some of the earlier classes are familiar with this, where we watch, first of all, the objects, the thoughts within the mind, using them as a method to actually perceive or get a mental image of the underlying nature of the mind, which is clear. Or in other words, in this context, the clarity of the mind means its lack of obstruction. Thoughts can emerge from the spaciousness of the consciousness. And they can absorb back into it. Like white clouds on a sunny day in the summer, warmed by the sunlight as they evaporate. They don't go somewhere else. They just absorb back into the air, leaving the space clear. Minds, our mental consciousnesses are not stained by the emotions, by the klesha, let's say, the destructive thoughts, even though they may have some stickiness in the sense of sticking around because of our familiarity with them. But we're not limited by that. We can learn by applying their antidotes, both temporal and ultimate antidotes. We can eliminate all our faulty minds, which bring about faulty behavior, creating karma and so forth. And we can develop within that mind, emerge from that mind, virtuous qualities, empathy and compassion, overcoming our tendency for selfishness and so forth. With that in mind, see if you can institute a state of bodhicitta with effort right now as a motivation for the class this morning. Bodhicitta is a mental primary consciousness that is informed by compassion on one hand, compassion for all sentient beings, great compassion, and with a desire born out of wisdom to achieve enlightenment, recognizing that the only way that we can compassionately eliminate the suffering of sentient beings perfectly, spontaneously, continuously, is for ourselves to achieve enlightenment. As that's a journey that is predominantly led by our consciousness, although physical behavior is also important, but the motivation is all done by the mind. Therefore, to better understand the mind, I'm going to participate this morning, listening, contemplating, meditating on the material, on the subject of lorik, awareness and knowing, and the ways of knowing, so that I can more effectively pursue that goal of achieving enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings. That's my goal in listening, my motivation for listening this morning. I'm going to take part, participate, listen, and contemplate for the sake of achieving enlightenment, for the sake of all sentient beings. And then before you leave that state, compare your respiration now with how it was when we're simply watching the breathing. And then bring your attention back to the present. Good morning. Yarpel's back with us. Yarpel, good morning. So, and good to see Stephen back again from his journeys. So, any observations, any questions or comments? We had our first class last week. Someone is unmuted and has their vacuum cleaner on in the background. There we go. Maybe it was Shanka. Stephen, you have your hand raised.
Thank you, Venerable George. So just a quick question. It might be kind of a silly one, but last week you mentioned not only the mental consciousness of a Buddha, but also the sense consciousnesses of a Buddha. And so that confused me a little bit. I thought the Buddhas were merely mental phenomena.
Yeah. So
they have eyes and skin and stuff.
The emanations do. And say, for instance, Shakyamuni Buddha was Buddha, right? So his mind was omniscient, and even his sense powers, which other people, perceived, observed, if they said something, they could infer that he heard them through his ear consciousness and smelled through his nose consciousness and so forth. When they gave him massage, when he was taking the aspect of having a fever, they could surmise that he had tactile consciousness that was feeling that, and so forth. So it's said that those sense consciousnesses that the Buddhas exhibit are actually omniscient themselves. So one of the great, I think it might have been Perpachok himself, I can't remember who is the author of the Lorik text that we're using. It said that when he got old, maybe it wasn't Perpachok, but someone, when he got old and his eyes were failing, he would take the aspect of running his fingers across the printed text, not a braille text, as though he was reading it with his tactile consciousness, sort of like his sense consciousness was omniscient also. So that is the general kind of explanation. Does that sort of answer your?
Yeah, I think so. If I can just say it back to see if I got it.
Yeah.
So we could say that the Nirmanakaya, that body of the Buddha, has sensory faculties. It's a physical manifestation that we can see. But can we say the same about the other bodies of the Buddha, the Sambhogakaya and the Dharmakaya?
Yeah, so Sambhogakaya is represented as having a physical form, like in the Tankas and so forth. And to the Arya Bodhisattvas who perceive that. So, you know, the Sambhogakaya is only observable by Aryas, and not just any Aryas, not the hearer or solitary realizer Aryas, but only the Arya Bodhisattvas in the Pure Land, and that would exhibit itself in a subtle kind of body to their perception, which would have all of its sense consciousnesses would be actually omniscient. They don't, when the Nirmanakaya exhibits itself in the world, like Shakyamuni Buddha, it didn't exhibit itself. It looked like it appears like it's made of flesh and blood, but it is actually an emanation of the Buddha's mind. So it doesn't have the same kind of faults of our bodies and so forth. Okay. So when we were meditating, I was thinking once there was a conference in London that I attended when I was at Manjushri Institute many years ago, in the late 70s. It was, I think every year they had a conference on the mind and new age kind of things, crystal, you know, there were booths all around, and Manjushri Institute had its own booth to try to, you know, interest people in meditation, Buddhist meditation. And there was one booth by, I can't remember the name of the guys. They had electroencephalograph that they could attach, which was the output of which would show on a computer in real time. Oftentimes when people in the past have had electroencephalographs, you know what electroencephalographs are? Who can say with some medical or psychological precision what an electroencephalograph is? David is going to say something, but he's muted. Were you going to say something, David?
I could make a guess and say it measures brain waves.
Is that a pretty good approximation? Something like that. So it would generally, when it's on paper and there's some kind of scroll, you would have to infer the amount of beta and alpha and delta waves, which were indicative of the depth of quiet or conceptualization of the mind. But they could have a bar graph on the screen showing how much beta and alpha and delta and so forth. And they had done experiments with Namkhe Norbu Rinpoche. I don't know if any of you have heard of Namkhe Norbu. Rowena, you're nodding, you've heard. Namkhe Norbu is a Dzogchen master. I believe he's still alive, in the kind of cross between Nyingma and Bön, which is a non-Buddhist tradition of Tibet. But anyway, he was a Dzogchen master. And they said when they put him on this, I think they called it the mind mirror, he could bounce between completely deep, almost delta wave, almost like deep sleep, to fully conceptualizing mind just instantaneously. Usually people, bars would change. Even if you're in deep concentration, it would take some time to move down. So it's possible to develop these qualities of the mind through meditation. I think my friend Alan Wallace, who probably some of you have heard also, who teaches meditation, where is it now? Mainly in Colorado? I can't remember. So Alan at one point purchased some of these also for his students, these mind mirrors, these real-time electroencephalographs. I just thought I would mention that to you. So Western science can measure certain aspects of mental activity from a Buddhist perspective, but it is not able to know the same kind of depth that you can know through your own introspection of the mind. You know, I call it the laboratory of the mind, where we do the great experiments, developing wisdom and compassion and so forth. Okay, so this is a little recap from last time. We're using the text by a great Tibetan Lama called Prabhuchok Jampa Getsul, and we're using the translation by Liz Napper, which I assume, does anyone not have a copy of that? It's been, Yerbal, Shankar, how can Yerbal get a copy of that?
Well, maybe Matt or I can put it on the chat, but Yarfel, we would like you, if you go on our website, the link for this class, you will see it right below or above the little click on the Zoom button, a registration link, and the material, all the material will automatically pop up once you fill it out, and we're required to do that for FPMT. And we'll also have your email if we have, like, Venerable George wants to send something to all the students or whatever. That way, that'll also help. But if you do it now, you will just get it immediately. So if you just fill it out, you will just get it, you know, so.
Okay, so the text begins, as I mentioned last time, I bow down to the Lama and the protector Manju Gosha. This word protector, it doesn't mean like a Dharma protector like Mahakala or something like that. Actually, the Sanskrit word is nath, which actually means natha, which means leader or guide. So when we talk about Shakyamuni Buddha and so forth, that term is used. So to the Lama and guide Manju Gosha, this is an explanation of the presentation of objects and object possessors, or in other words, objects and subjects. Object possessors are for instance, persons or consciousness or articulate sound which possess objects. So subjects are called literally in Tibetan object possessors, but it means subjects. This is a presentation of objects and subjects as well as awareness and knowers from within the greater path of reasoning. The magical key to the path of reasoning, the presentation of the collected topics revealing the meaning of the treatises on valid cognition. Very long title. Mainly this is a set of literature that's called collected topics. And then it immediately goes into several pages in the English translation that have some white lines around it, sort of brackets around it, indicating that that's not the main part of the text. Generally, I mentioned last time, the Tibetan texts on these kind of technical subjects, not all of them, but the Tibetan texts that were not translated just from Sanskrit had three main sections. They call Gak, Shak, Pong, Sum. Sum means three. Gak means refuting. Shak means presenting, or, you know, placing down. And Pong means dispelling. So what it means is at the beginning of the text, when you begin to study a subject, certain misconceptions that other scholars, either Buddhist or non-Buddhist, have proposed about the subject, like say consciousness, they are rejected. They are refuted, rather. You know, if someone says this, that's wrong because this, and this. Then the main part of the text that we're going to be concerned with is what's called shak, or presenting one's own tradition. In the Tibetan text, it says rang luk. Rang means self, luk means tradition. So going over those pages which were talking about the rejecting or refuting the wrong ideas. On page 7, the text headline says part 1, but it just says Yul in Tibetan, objects. So we talked about this last time, but just as a review, in our own system, our Rangluk, our self-tradition, our own tradition, concerning the first from among the two objects and subjects, or objects and object possessors, the definition of an object is that which is known by an awareness. So that's the very first sort of statement of the text. Definition: an object is that which is known, that which is known by an awareness. So everything is an object from that point of view. Everything can be known by an awareness. Even awareness itself can be known by other consciousnesses. Someone with clairvoyance, like the Buddha's mind, can know our mind. So from that point of view, even our consciousness is an object, but our consciousnesses are object possessors or subjects because they apprehend or know objects. Objects in the general sense would mean like, trees and bushes and houses and cars, objects of the eye, ear, nose, taste, and tactile consciousness. So from this point of view, when you talk about Yul and Yulchen, objects and subjects, here in this context, when you put those two together, when you talk about objects, we mainly talk about 3 kinds of objects, because they are objects of those things that are known by awareness. So we talk about, the text says, when objects are divided, there are 3: appearing objects, determined objects, and objects of engagement. You could, instead of saying determined objects, you could say conceived objects or objects of conception. It's the Tibetan word is shenyul. Shen means kind of is referring to an object that is conceived, or here it's translated determined object. Appearing objects, determined objects, and objects of engagement. And it immediately says appearing objects of a particular awareness and the apprehended object of that awareness are synonymous. So you could say there are 4 appearing objects are synonymous with apprehended objects. And those, you could say those are 2, and then determined objects and objects of engagement. So all of the objects in this case are talking about how the objects are known by an awareness. Then it says, whatever is an established base is necessarily an appearing object. So we mentioned last time, and it just as reiteration, established base is a synonym of existent. Whatever exists, another way of saying that is established base. Whatever is an established base is necessarily an appearing object, because you could say whatever exists either has to be permanent or impermanent, right? Is that right or not? Is there a third category of existence? Christine, what do you think? Everything has to be included amongst permanent and impermanent phenomena. So whatever is an established base, or whatever exists, is an appearing object, because whatever is a thing, the text just says thing, which the Tibetan word is ngopo, which sometimes in the past people have translated as functioning thing, just to make sure one knows. Thing here refers to something which is impermanent, and because anything that is impermanent has the capability of fulfilling some function, of doing something. How about the big boulder, the big rock in your lawn that your lawnmower sometimes hits and chips the blade on? What does it do? What kind of function can it perform? It looks like it's permanent, doesn't it? But a rock or a boulder, is that permanent or impermanent? Anyone have an idea? Roanna, what do you think?
I think it's impermanent.
How come?
I lived in Big Sur. The rocks all fall down and fall apart.
Okay, that's good. This is a good observation. Even if you think they're permanent, you have to realize that they disintegrate over time due to the elements. But if you know something about science, the atoms, the molecules within them are moving. They are impermanent phenomena, and they have come about because of causes and conditions, and they can cause other things can happen. They can cause your lawnmower blade to chip, so they perform a function. So whatever is an established base is necessarily an appearing object. This is because whatever is a thing, a functioning thing, an impermanent phenomena, is necessarily the appearing object of a direct perceiver. Everything which is impermanent can be perceived by a direct perceiver. So here we haven't defined what a direct perceiver is yet, but just getting a general idea, a direct perceiver is something that knows its object by the fact that the object presents itself obviously to that consciousness, and it is known not by way of some kind of mental image, but it's actually known directly. So we can call it direct perceiver. The actual Tibetan word for direct perceiver is ngunsum. Unfortunately, our text doesn't put in sort of brackets or in the back, there's not like an index of what these terms are. So you might run across some. Ngunsum. Ngunsum is the Tibetan. The Sanskrit is Prataksha. Do you know, Shanka, what Prataksha means? What does it mean to your colloquial Sanskrit?
Prataksha means I don't remember, to be honest.
Okay, good. That's good.
It depends on what the prefix is. If it's pratya means every, but I don't remember what the word is now.
Prataksha. So does anyone know? Prataksha, we mentioned in our tenets class, those of you who were studying tenets with us, Prataksha generally in the lower tenets means, it refers to the subject, like direct perceiver, something that knows, has the capacity to know things directly. But from the Prasangika point of view, Prataksha also and predominantly means the objects. Prataksha means that which is obvious or manifest, that which can be known without without relying on conception. Okay, from the present, do you remember in the Prasangika point of view? So here it says, it's translating Prataksha or ngunsum as direct perceiver, even though that word mainly, for the Prasangika point of view, mainly refers to the objects which are manifesting obviously or directly. Here it's translating as direct perceiver. Whatever is an appearing object is necessarily whatever is a thing is necessarily the appearing object of a direct perceiver. And whatever is permanent is necessarily the appearing object of a conceptual consciousness. So the appearing object of a conceptual consciousness means the mental image or meaning generality. When you think about, you know, your mother's face, or you think about something in your mind, there is, it seems like you're imagining that, it doesn't have to be a visual, when we say mental image, it doesn't have to mean an image in the sense of visual image. You can think about a sound. You can think about drums, or you can think about the sound of a friend of yours, or the sound, the voice of an enemy, which causes you to feel some indignation. You can imagine smells, odors, tastes, tactile sensations. All of those are mental images or meaning generalities to your conception. You can conceive of impermanent things, but the appearing object of conception means the main thing that appears to conception is this meaning generality, which itself is impermanent. Because of that, your mental consciousness can conceive of permanent things, like the lack of obstructing contact. True cessations are permanent phenomena. Do you remember from the Four Noble Truths? True cessations are permanent phenomena. Space, emptiness, and selflessness are also permanent phenomena. They don't change moment by moment. And they are the appearing object of conception. Now, Karen had her hand up, her sort of pinkish hand before Stephen's yellowish hand. So Karen, you have an observation or question?
Hi, George. Yes, I do. I actually took this class already, so I hope I'm not jumping ahead.
Okay.
But it says that I have a question that bugged me the entire time on when I took this before, in that what really is the difference between, for a conceptual consciousness, a determined object and a appearing object, if it's conceptual? I've never quite understood. I mean, they're equivalent and equal, but what is the point of having a determined object if it's...
Okay, they're not equivalent, first of all. Appearing object of conception is the main thing that appears to your conception. Right? We put that proviso because, say, for instance, if you imagine your mother's face, it is said, even if your mother's passed away or has lost her face in an accident, so if you imagine it, it is still said that your mother's face does appear, but it's the main thing. It is not the main thing that appears to conception. The main thing that appears to the conception is the mental image of your mother's face, which you construe to be your mother's face. That's called the appearing object. So the appearing object of a conception is defined to be the main thing that appears to the conception, which is the mental image or meaning generality. Okay? The determined object is actually out there, your mother's actual face. That's what you are determining or conceiving of. Okay, the terminology in our text calls that the determined object. I said you could call that the conceived object, the object that you're conceiving of, you're getting at. So the appearing object of conception is very different than the determined object of conception. Does it make sense?
Yeah, and then the object of engagement is
So
your mother?
So we did talk about object of engagement. So for conception, the determined object or the conceived object is the object that is actually engaged. That's what you are getting at. You could say engaged object means that's what you are actually entering or engaging, the jukyul. So for a conception, the determined object, that which you're conceiving of or knowing, your mother's face, is actually the object you're engaging. That's the engaged object. The appearing object, or what did we say here? The object is synonymous with the apprehended object or the beheld object. That's what's appearing to your consciousness, the mental image of your mother's face. Okay, this will come up again when we give the definitions of this. Stephen, you have a question also, or comment, observation?
Yes, Venerable George, thank you. I thought I heard you say that the meaning generality was impermanent.
No,
Okay.
the meaning of generality from sort of Buddhist understanding is a permanent phenomena or phenomenon, singular. You can conceive of, you can imagine a running horse, or you can imagine, a waterfall, which is impermanent, or you can actually, you can realize with conception impermanence. You have a mental image of impermanence, but that mental image itself is said to be permanent, because the way that it evolves in the mind, you might say, the way that it comes about is because of negating something. Like we might say that the mental image of a cow is the opposite or the reverse of a non-cow. So what's a non-cow? Non-cow is everything in the universe which is not a cow. Non-cow. The reverse of non-cow, or the opposite of non-cow, goes back to just cow. It sort of is eliminating everything else. This sort of, one of the special flavors of a mental image is that it is what's called an eliminative engager. It engages its what you're knowing by eliminating everything else. It's just like, say, if you wanted to pinpoint in a television studio one person in the audience, you turn off all the lights and just have a spotlight on that one person, right? You've eliminated everything else and you're just pointing out one thing. So things that are engaging their objects by eliminating everything else are called, well, they're permanent. They're eliminative engagers. They're the mental image. So that's much different than the way that our sense powers, direct perceivers, know their objects. Well, the mental consciousness can also know directly, but not when it's doing that, it doesn't have a mental image. Direct perceivers engage collectively all the qualities. When you see, when I look at my little air purifier on the other side of the room, I see its shape and color, and I can hear it if it's on. I can maybe even notice with my nose consciousness there's less dust in the air or something like that. So I can, all of its qualities appear to a direct perceiver. Okay, so I'll leave it at that. Is that more or less answer?
Yeah, thank you, Venerable George.
And Shanka has a question.
So if okay, correct me if my understanding is wrong or correct.
Well, then it's not an understanding if it's wrong, right? It's a mis.
Okay, correct me if my doubt is going the wrong way, which is that, so if this is regarding the eliminative object, right? Is that what you call it? Eliminative engager. So if I see something and I say it's a pot, what the mental image that I'm seeing is not really the details of the pot, but rather all the characteristics that pots generally have, like a handle, it holds water, whatever it is, so forth and so on. So eliminate everything else that's not a pot. So I have an image of a pot, the qualities of a pot, and then I say, okay, this object fits the description of what I believe is a pot. And so that's then how I conceive of it. Is that correct?
Something like that. The idea here is that not all the qualities of the pot are appearing to you. For instance, its impermanence is not appearing to you in that mental image. Because the mental image itself is permanent. So the impermanence of the pot is not the appearing object. You are knowing the pot by that. You can know with a mental image things that are impermanent. For instance, you can, by using logic, you can prove to yourself that all compounded phenomena are impermanent. And you can actually realize impermanence via that mental image. But that mental image itself is not the actual impermanence. It's just a mental image of it. Christine, you have a hand up that I can barely see because it's exactly over the white light in the corner of your screen.
Okay, I'll adjust it. Thank you, Venerable George. My question is, so all these things that we see that are permanent, these conceptual consciousnesses, are they delusions? Because they're not really permanent, and they're impermanent, but the image we're seeing is permanent. Is that correct?
So when you said the things we see, so we're not talking about things you see with your eye.
No, I'm talking about the mental consciousness.
Okay.
Image.
Yeah.
The thing.
So,
go ahead. So if my mental consciousness is imagining a pot, that pot is impermanent.
The actual pot that you're determining,
right? The determined
of, that's the determined object. That is indeed impermanent.
Permanent, but the mental image is permanent.
Right.
So is that a delusion?
It's not a delusion. That's just the way it works, and
not really permanent.
So that's why, especially the lower schools, put prominence on direct perception, because you're actually the appearing object is what you're actually engaging or getting at. Whereas in conception, the appearing object is not what you're getting at, is not what you're determining, it's something different. So it's said to be mistaken. So conceptual consciousness, although it can be, and we'll get into this a little bit later, although conceptual consciousnesses can be infallible and they can realize their object, they are said to be mistaken because what appears to be the object is the mental image, which is not the actual object.
Right.
Even the mental image of a pot is not the actual pot, or the mental image of emptiness is not actual emptiness. But say, for instance, you can intellectually realize emptiness, even though it's a mental image of emptiness, if it's factually concordant, that the mental image actually, that you're, so it's not so, by image, again, it doesn't necessarily mean something that you can imagine as an object of sight, but your understanding of emptiness or the clear light nature of the mind. In our meditation at the beginning, we're developing a mental image of that clear light nature. It's very, very difficult to actually have a direct perception of that clear light nature, although you can get to that eventually. But you can still realize that clear light nature, even though it's not a direct perception of it with your mental consciousness, as long once you've eliminated all the misconceptions, your mental image of it has eliminated all the misconceptions and has the correct understanding of that. That's said to be a realization of that. Okay.
The mental image is a realization.
Coming.
The mental image is a realization. The conceptual consciousness.
The mental image is different than the consciousness, right?
Right. Okay.
The mental image is that by which the consciousness determines or knows its object.
Okay. And does Prasangika call that mistaken, or do the lower schools call that mistaken?
All of the schools use that terminology, mistaken,
Oh.
So we'll come into that again. So there are two terms, especially we studied in when it came up in tenets: infallible, or as they say, fallible and mistaken. Fallible means that you have not gotten rid of the misconceptions. It's not factually concordant. Mistaken means you're mistaken with respect to the appearing object. So conception is necessarily mistaken because what appears to you is a mental image, which is not the actual thing.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So let's go on a little bit further. So whatever was a thing is necessarily the appearing object of a direct perception or direct perceiver, and whatever is permanent is necessarily the appearing object of conceptual consciousness. The first reason is established because appearing object of a direct perceiver, apprehended object of a direct perceiver, and thing are synonymous. So if you wanted to give a synonym of thing, functioning thing, you could say it is a synonym of that is the appearing object of a direct perceiver, or the what is the word they use? Apprehended object, the beheld object of a direct perceiver. Furthermore, it follows that whatever is a thing must be the appearing object of a direct perceiver, because whatever is a thing must be that which is realized in a manifest manner by a direct perceiver. Whatever is the appearing object of a direct perceiver. Oh, you're moving what you could do is you can make your hand more opaque. You can choose a different color for your hand. So for instance, here, a direct perceiver, its objects are manifest or obvious objects. So those two terms are synonymous: obvious, prataksha, and manifest. Manifest objects are things that can be perceived without needing any logic. You know, the color of fire or smoke, or trees and people and cars and so forth. They're all manifest phenomena. Sounds are manifest phenomena. Odors, tastes, tactile sensations are all manifest phenomena, or synonymous with that, they're obvious phenomena. That is to say, they present themselves to the obvious perceivers, the direct perceivers. So the object is called prataksha, obvious, or what's the word that they're using here? Manifest. And the consciousness, the direct perceiver, is a direct perceiver. The second basic reason, that is, in other words, whatever is permanent is necessarily the appearing object of a conceptual consciousness. That is true. That is established because the appearing object of a conceptual consciousness, the apprehended object of a conceptual consciousness, and permanent phenomena are synonymous. So the appearing object of a mental consciousness, the appearing object of a conceptual consciousness is its mental image. And so that is permanent. The apprehended object of a conceptual consciousness, that's synonymous with the appearing object. That's what's apprehended. It's not necessarily what you're conceiving of, but that's what's apprehended. And permanent phenomena are synonymous. So these are things you have to sort of think about for a while and debate with yourself, question and ask other people to start to get an understanding of just these basic facts. Also, the object of engagement of a direct perceiver and the object of the mode of apprehension of a direct perceiver are synonymous. Because they're synonymous, it's not, they can be used interchangeably. They're not something that's different. The object of engagement of a direct perceiver. So what's that? Say eye consciousness. What is the object that it is engaging? What is its object of engagement? That's the actual thing. You have to think about it for some time, because let's say your eye consciousness, what it is actually perceiving is the inverted, let's say if the tree is like here, there is an image of the tree on your retina, right? Within which are the subtle matter, not just the rods and cones of the retina, but what's called the eye faculty. That is said to be engaging the object. That's the object of engagement, the actual tree, even though it appears to yourself as an inverted image on your retina. The object of engagement of a direct perceiver and the object of the mode of apprehension of a direct perceiver are synonymous. So those are just terms that are used interchangeably. Christine, you still have your hand up, I think. No, okay. I think it's there, but anyway. Determined object of thought, object of engagement of thought, or object of engagement of conception, and object of the mode of apprehension of thought are synonymous. So here the word thought is another way of saying conception. So when you have a conceptual consciousness, which, can you have conceptual consciousness in your ear or eye? Yarpil, do you know? Can you have conception in your eye consciousness? You have to unmute while you're thinking so that I can hear you when you give an answer.
I think for the eye conscious, I'm not sure if saying you're seeing color and shape is conception, or is that just a directly perceiving color and shape, and your mental consciousness makes something out of that.
Right. Yeah. So there's a little bit of understanding here that you have to have as a background. Your eye consciousness knows things directly. It is non-conceptual. There are no conceptual consciousnesses in the eye consciousness. Conception only takes place in the mental consciousness, in the sixth consciousness. So although you're seeing something, like you see an attractive painting in the museum, or you have on YouTube or television, or something, you have an attractive appearance. Your eye consciousness is knowing directly, but your mental consciousness can then can think about that, can analyze that. That is all conceptual. And the process may be going on at the same time, but your eye consciousness is not thinking, oh, that's a beautiful picture. Your eye consciousness is not thinking that. Your mental consciousness is thinking that.
So is the eye consciousness saying picture, or is the mental consciousness saying picture?
Neither, the eye consciousness is not saying anything.
Right, it's just saying color and shape.
Just a receptor, sort of like the guard in the basement that's looking at all of the surveillance cameras at the north door and the hallway, and the safe in the crime movies on TV. So that is just a receptor. That monitor is not thinking, oh, there's a thief. Although it might have some motion detection that can bleep that there's a thief. The eye consciousness is like the monitor. The mental consciousness is like the guard or the supervisor of that, who's actually aware. Oh, there's a thief at the door. There's there's a fire in the hallway. That is a function of the mental consciousness. So the eye consciousness doesn't think, oh, that's a really handsome guy. That's a really pretty girl. That's a nice cup of tea. That's all done by the mental consciousness. That's all conception, thought.
So doesn't the mental consciousness do the merely labeling, even say that's a cup of tea? Like there's no truly existent.
The mental consciousness does impute. Yeah, can impute. Well, let's leave that for the time being.
Yeah.
Let's go a little bit further. Also, object of engagement of direct perceiver, would finish that. Determined object of thought, the determined object of a conception, that which you're getting at, the object of engagement, that which you're getting at, and the object of the mode of apprehension of thought are synonymous. They all refer to the thing that you're thinking about, right? Not the mental image that's appearing to you. That's called the appearing object or the mental image. Whatever is an established base is necessarily the object of mode of apprehension of both a conceptual and a non-conceptual consciousness. So now you have to sort of put all these things together. Object of the mode of apprehension means the object of engagement. Object of the mode of apprehension, right? Because that's a synonym of object of engagement. That's what you're actually getting at. Whatever is an established base, in other words, whatever exists is necessarily the engaged object or the object of the mode of apprehension of both a conceptual and a non-conceptual consciousness. In other words, whatever exists can be known, can be got at by a direct perceiver, and all five of them, or even a mental direct perceiver, or by conception. You can know, you can get at all phenomena with either direct perception or conception. The main thing is that conception is mistaken in this technical sense because what appears to you to be the thing is just a mental image of it. It's not the actual thing. It's not the actual manifest object that's appearing to you. Whatever is the object of the mode of apprehension of a thought consciousness apprehending it, I don't think we got this far last time. Whatever is the object of the mode of apprehension, in other words, the engaged object of a thought consciousness, whatever you're getting at, is not necessarily the object of the mode of apprehension of thought. So I noticed Nadine's head just turning slightly like, Nadine, what do you think?
I did not understand. I wanted to look in the text and read it slowly.
Yeah. Okay, so now we're getting to some points where you have to think about this deeply. Whatever is the mode of apprehension, in other words, what is the engaged object of a thought consciousness? Can you think about, for instance, something that doesn't exist?
No.
Ida, what do you think? You have to unmute. There you go.
Thank you, Venerable. I'm trying to apply these concepts to a wrong conception. Like, for example, you see what appears to be smoke in the mountain, and it's actually fog.
Right.
How will you apply this, what is the appearing object? What is the determined object? What is the engaged object in this case? When you're seeing, you think that you're seeing smoke and you're actually seeing fog.
Okay, so there's two things taking place, kind of like what Yarpo was talking about. Your eye consciousness is seeing something that looks like smoke. Actually, if you were to ask you at that point, someone said, maybe that's fog, you might be in doubt. It looks like something foggy or smoky, right? Your mental consciousness may have made a decision, either correctly or incorrectly, either based on reason or just assumption, that it is smoke or that it is smog or fog, right? So the different things that are taking place. So if you are thinking what is, say in the mountains, if it's actually smog or fog, you're up among the, the cloud level, it's actually kind of cloudy, but you think it's smoke. That is the smoke that you're conceiving of doesn't exist, right? Let's assume this is an actual, what you're actually seeing is moisture, whatever you call it, like foggy, smoggy, and you're thinking that it's smoke. That's a wrong conception. The smoke that you're conceiving of, that this, what your eyes are seeing, that this is smoke, that is wrong, right? That's a wrong conception. So the object your mental consciousness is engaging is smoke, right? It's an engaged object.
So that would be the object.
That's the determined object, right? Of the conception. The engaged object of your eye consciousness is this, you don't necessarily want to label it, is some kind of smoky, foggy kind of appearance. That's its engaged object. That does exist. But your mental consciousness thinking that that is actually smoke when it's not, its determined object, although you're thinking of something, smoke, that doesn't exist in that particular context. So here, better example, because it's getting that is a little bit ambiguous. You have to think about that. Say for instance, a self of persons, permanent, partless, independent, or inherently existent, whatever level of subtlety you want to talk about. Say for instance, in meditation, or even in not in meditation, there appears to your mental consciousness an inherently existent self. Don't mess with me. Don't call me a liar. A sense of an inherently existent self that, because of its destructive nature, because of being something that doesn't really exist, that gives rise to other delusions, gives rise to anger and attachment and so forth, all of the other problematic states of mind. So when you conceive of a self of persons without having wisdom that realizes its actual nature, you are the determined object of that thought doesn't exist, a self, inherently existent self of persons. Although you can think about it. You can think about a lot of things that don't exist. You can think about the child of a barren woman. You know what a barren woman is? David, do you know what a barren woman means?
Oh, we can't have child.
A barren woman cannot have children.
Yeah, a barren woman is like the barren garden or barren desert. You can't grow anything. A barren woman is is a woman who is not capable of having children for some reason. So if you can imagine, oh yeah, the son of a barren woman, that's an imagination of something that doesn't exist. So you can imagine, you can conceive, you can determine, have a determinative knower, that is a conceptual consciousness of something that doesn't exist. So it's the object that you're engaging, the barren, the child of the barren woman, that doesn't exist. So use that as a point of reference here. Whatever is the object of the mode of apprehension, that means whatever is the engaged object or the determined object of a thought consciousness, apprehending it, we're apprehending the son of a barren woman, is not necessarily the object of the mode of apprehension of thought. So it's getting into some kind of technical subtlety here. To be so this is because the horns of a rabbit, like the son of a barren woman, that's another classic example. The horns of a rabbit. Do rabbits have horns?
only in New Mexico, they're jackalopes.
Jackalopes, yeah. I told in our other class last year when Geshe Tekchok was teaching this many years ago in Manjushri Institute, there was one German monk in the front row, Helmut, who was always kind of laughing. And Geshe Tekchok had this little postcard from New Mexico of a so-called jackalope, you know, a rabbit with big horns on its head. So the idea of the horns of a rabbit obviously is because in the morning you get up for your cup of tea, you look out the window in the fog, there's a rabbit in the garden, and in the distance, its ears look, you know, you misconceive them with your mental consciousness to be horns. Your eye consciousness doesn't say horns. Your mental consciousness is thinking, oh, those are horns, right? So that's something that doesn't exist, the horns of a rabbit. Whatever is the object of mode of apprehension of a thought consciousness apprehending it, whatever is the object determined or gotten at by a thought consciousness apprehending it, is not necessarily the object of engagement of thought. It might sound contradictory because that is a thought consciousness, right? Here, the reason, this is because the horns of a rabbit are not the object of the mode of apprehension of thought. They are not what are actually gotten at by thought. This follows because the horns of a rabbit are not an object of thought. This is because the horns of a rabbit are not the object of awareness, which is because the horns of a rabbit are not that which is suitable to be the object of an awareness. It follows that the subject, the horns of a rabbit, is the object of mode of apprehension of a thought consciousness apprehending it because of being selfless. Okay, before I just let it ruminate for a second. Those of you who've read this for some time, I asked to read up, a couple pages in advance. So some of you may have read this. Jamie, did you read this? Have a chance to read this in preparation from last week? You're still muted.
Oh,
there you go.
no, I haven't read it.
Okay. What is that? It sounds like contradictory. One side has said, what do I say here? Whatever is the object of the mode of apprehension of a thought consciousness apprehending it. So there is a thought consciousness apprehending the horns of a rabbit. That means it's thinking about the horns of a rabbit, it's imagining the horns of a rabbit. It is not necessarily the object of the mode of apprehension of thought. Sounds contradictory because this is a thought consciousness apprehending. It sounds like that's the object of apprehension of that thought. So the point is something is a little bit terminological. That is to say, we can talk about the object of engagement of the thought thinking about the horns of a rabbit. That's the so-called horns of a rabbit. Those horns of a rabbit are only, let's say, the object of engagement of that is the horns of a rabbit, right? That's what you're supposedly engaging or determining or conceiving of. Those horns of a rabbit do not exist. So that object of engagement is only, let's say, labeled object of engagement. Object of engagement generally has to exist. It's just a merely labeled that. So it says, if the very final sentence on page 7, it follows that the subject, here in this case, the horns of a rabbit, is the object of the mode of apprehension of a thought consciousness apprehending it because of being selfless. So here we're getting into another, a larger category. We said whatever was an established base earlier had to be the appearing object of either direct perception or conception, right? established base. What's an established base? Something that exists. Now we come to in the last word of this last line of page 7, because of being selfless. Selfless is even a bigger category than existent, than established base. Are established bases or existence selfless? What do you think, Stephen? Whatever exists, is it necessarily selfless? Yeah, selfless here in the sense of being, well, from the Sautrantika point of view, which this text is written from, it's selfless because it's not the object of a self of persons, or from, if we want to take a more sophisticated view, from Prasangika point of view, it is empty of everything that exists is empty of being inherently existent, right? How about everything that doesn't exist, like the horns of a rabbit? Charmaine, are the horns of a rabbit empty of inherent existence?
I mean, sure, why not?
Okay, that's why not? Yeah,
I don't quite know.
you could say that. So here's when we talk about generally what we talked about previously were existence. All things that are existent are either permanent or impermanent. Okay, are the horns of the rabbit? Could you say the horns of a rabbit are permanent?
I mean, the horns of a rabbit, they don't exist.
So, but Christine above you, and at least my view, she's saying yes. You think the horns of a rabbit are permanent? Christine, verbally, tell me, what do you think?
Well, the conceptual, mental conception of them are permanent.
And I didn't say that.
Oh, okay. Well, then no, then I don't. Okay, I take that back then. Just the mental conception of them.
Yeah, if I say, yeah, you have to be. We're having the learning to be precise.
Precise. Okay.
Verbally. So
okay.
The horns of a rabbit do not exist. So they are not in the category of existence having to be either permanent or impermanent. In fact, you can't say the horns of a rabbit are permanent or impermanent because they don't exist. Yet, the horns of a rabbit do have a quality that's shared by all existence in that they are selfless. That is, or say from the Prasangika point of view, they are empty of inherent existence. If they were not empty of inherent existence, they would have to be inherently existent, right? The horns of a rabbit are not inherently existent. Oh, I thought that was on one of you. I installed a motion detector to keep the woodpecker off of my log cabin the other day, and I'm hearing it. The woodpecker must be coming back and forth near my nice, tasty logs. It's not so much the logs. I think it's some kind of little insect that's burrowed into my logs. I was thinking that was on one of your things, but I'm hearing it outside there. So here it says, the last line says, the last paragraph says, it follows that the subject, the horns of a rabbit, something that doesn't exist, right, is the object of the mode of apprehension of a thought consciousness apprehending it. So we can think about things that don't exist, right? We can think about horns of a rabbit. We can think about the sons of a barren woman. We can think about, I was going to make a political statement about honest Trump or something like that, but I'll leave that off. It follows that the subject, the horns of a rabbit, is the object of the mode of apprehension of a thought consciousness apprehending it because of being selfless. That means we can think about things that are permanent or impermanent, and we can think about things that don't exist at all. Okay, so think about this over the week. This little paragraph. Okay, the last part on page 7. So let's go on now. This is more or less where we talked, only just barely introduced that last time. Charmaine, I'll give you one quick shot.
Well, maybe you don't want to answer this now, and that's okay, but I'm sort of stuck on Karen's question, because in our discussion, it kind of feels to me like we're using the determined object and the object that we're the object of engagement almost synonymously. Like I'm having a really hard time trying to figure out what the difference between the 3 objects are. The appearing object seems clear, but I'm even confused about that, because sometimes the appearing object feels like it's the determined object when we're talking about a mental image. So I'm just getting really confused.
Okay, no. Okay, so determined object is never the appearing object. Why? Because determined object is it only is used when you talk about conception. Okay, so there's 2 kinds of basic facts here. In conception, you have the thing that's appearing to you, that's the mental image, and the thing that you're getting at, which is out there, you know, your actual mother's face, right? That's the determined object. The appearing object is the mental image. So they're never the same, because determined object only is used when you talk about conception. When you talk about direct perception, which can be also mental, the appearing object is the engaged object. You wouldn't say it's, you wouldn't, even for a mental direct perception, you wouldn't talk about the determined object of mental direct perception. Determined object is only used when you talk about conception, conceptual mind, thought. That's the thing you're imagining. You could say the imagined object.
So what is the difference between the imagined object and the mental image that's appearing of the object?
Because the mental image appears to be the thing you're imagining, like your mother's face, but your mother's face is actually something that's impermanent. The mental image of it is permanent. It's just like, it's an object that the mind has, that it emerges from the mind, appearing to be your mother's face, but is not your mother's face. That's why conception is said to be mistaken, because its appearing object appears to be your mother's face, but it is not. Your mother's face is what you're imagining or determining or engaging. Okay.
And so do we always see the determined object first before we suddenly put on that?
No, you don't see the determined object. You conceive of the determined object, right?
Okay.
And what is appearing to your consciousness, not necessarily in the sense of visual appearance, because it could be a sound, a smell, a taste. What is the appearing object is your mental image of that.
Okay, so you could conceive of your mother's face, right? You can conceive of your mother's face, and that is an impermanent phenomena. And then the mind puts this mental image on top of it. You sort of embellish it, and it becomes this permanent.
So it's not in that order. To conceive of your mother's face, first of all, there's a mental image of your mother's face, and it's through that you conceive of your mother's face, or you determine your mother's face.
How does that?
Said that the actual mother's face is actually appearing to that conception, your actual mother's face, but it is not the main thing that's appearing. The main thing that's appearing is your mental image of your mother's face, and you cannot separate the appearance of your mother's face, that is to say the mental image, you cannot distinguish it from your actual mother's face. let's leave that for the time being, because we're going to come back to that again and again, and we want to go a little bit further. So at the end of page 7, when we go to page 8, you notice that that's all in brackets. 9 is in brackets because that is, again, that is dispelling, or that is refuting wrong ideas about the next subject, which is subjects. On page 10, the text says part 2, object possessors. And remember, Liz Napper is taking sort of like just literally from the Tibetan Yulchen, object possessors. We could just say subjects. So subjects, there are objects and there are subjects in this pair, objects and subjects, right? So with respect to the second, because we've talked about the first, objects, just previously now. With respect to the second, object possessors or subjects, there are 2 parts, definitions and divisions. The definition of a subject, the definition of something's being an object possessor or being a subject is a thing that possesses its respective object. Something that possesses or has its own object. We could put it in other words. Respect could mean its own, okay? So a subject is something that has its own object. There are 3 kinds of subjects, division. Second, when object possessors or subjects are divided, there are 3. Persons, awarenesses, and expressive sounds, or articulate sounds. What does that mean? When we talked about the 3 kinds of objects before, appearing objects, determined objects, and what was the third one? Engaged objects, right? We said they were all, we wouldn't talk about objects like apples and trees and cars, and we talked about how they appeared to subject minds. So the second of these 3 divisions, awarenesses, are all called subjects because they possess, how do we say this? They possess their own objects. An eye consciousness has its own objects, shapes and colors. Ear consciousness has its own objects, possesses its own objects, sounds. Nose consciousness has its own objects, odors. Tongue consciousness, taste. Tactile consciousness, tactile objects, which we tried to talk a little bit about last time, could be rough, smooth, hot, cold, other kinds of tactile objects. So now we have 2 other kinds of subjects that are talked about here, persons and expressive sounds. The list goes persons, awarenesses, and expressive sounds. You don't have to put them in that order. Persons are said to be subjects. Why? Do persons necessarily have consciousness? Can you have a person that doesn't have a consciousness? Let me ask someone whose face is not up there, but they may be listening. Karen, are you available? Okay, Karen.
Yes. Persons have consciousness because they're accumulation of some of the aggregates.
A person is a being that's imputed on suitable, what do we say? Suitable, a suitable number of the aggregates, right? So can you impute a person that does not have consciousness?
No.
Persons necessarily have consciousness. Say, for instance, in the formless realm, have you heard of the formless realm?
Yes.
Okay. In the formless realm, it's possible to be reborn there without a gross form. They still have some kind of subtle form, according to Tantra, some kind of wind associated with the consciousness. All there is consciousness there, but that's suitable to label a person, consciousness. In the desire realm or in the form realm, or in the desire realm or form realm, you have to have, you label a person on the 5 aggregates, right? Actually, there's a little bit of debate here. Like, say, for instance, if you hear on the telephone someone speaking who you know, and they say, it's me, you, at that point, are you apprehending the person? You just hear their sound. Or you just see Stephen walking down his mirror pool behind him. You only see him. You're not apprehending his consciousness. Well, maybe you can infer it because he's walking, but he might be a robot. You're not hearing his voice or anything. Can you impute the person, Stephen, on his form aggregate? Yeah, in certain circumstances, but it's the actual person is imputed in the desire realm and in the form realm on the 5 aggregates. And in the formless realm, it's imputed just on the mental, just on the consciousness aggregate, because there are no gross forms in the formless realm. That's actually what's meant when we say the person is imputed on a suitable, on the what is suitable among the 5 aggregates. What's suitable in the formless realm is just consciousness. What's suitable in the form and desire realms are the 5 aggregates. So Rowena, you had some kind of doubt, I think. Or question.
I had a doubt. Maybe it's a bit further down the list here, but if you are in a crowd and you see somebody simply by the jacket, like they're down going, it's all concept, and immediately you have a concept of that person and it's accurate. What's going on?
Well, you're inferring the existence of the person, but your mind would know that that person, sort of the definition of a person is someone that is imputed on the 5 aggregates. So you would know that person has consciousness, not just a jacket, that they bought it at Nordstrom's or something. They just bought it. They're so proud of it. It's so like weird looking. So, oh, there's Susie or there's John or something. You would know that they have consciousness. You would know that they have feelings, compositional factors, discrimination, and form aggregate and so forth, okay?
Okay.
So here, persons are said to be subjects for various reasons. Persons are said to be subjects because they have objects. I have my Subaru Outback. I have my iPad. I have my robes. But more fundamentally, you could say that persons are subjects because they have consciousness and, or in other words, awareness, because awareness is the basic subject that we're talking about in this course, right? Because it possesses objects, it knows objects. So persons, like say, for instance, an important concept to understand. Say, for instance, someone who is sawing down a tree. The action is sawing, or let's say chopping, a log person or logman or logwoman. Chopping is the action. The object that is being acted upon is the tree. What is the subject? We always, when you talk about actions, there always has to be a subject, an object acted upon, and the action. What is the subject of cutting the tree? Yarpro, what do you think? Is it the saw? Is that the subject? Or is it the person who's wielding the saw or axe? You're muted. You have to unmute.
The person wielding the axe or the saw.
That's
Is
the
the
actual subject,
The subject.
or the actor. Let's say the actor.
Actor.
Actually, both the saw or the axe and the person wielding it are, let's say, the actors.
Yes.
More precisely, when you say that, we say that the saw is or the axe is the instrument,
Of the actor.
and the person is the actor or subject. Okay, so that's relevant. That's relevant when we talk about emptiness in various contexts. So it's good to know that. But here in this context, you could say the person is the subject because he or she has the instrument of the mind, awareness. Because awareness is, or consciousness is a subject because it perceives objects, it has objects. A person is also a subject in, because they possess objects in a more gross way. I possess my Subaru or my cabin or something like that. So when we talk about subjects, persons, awarenesses, and expressive sounds. What are expressive sounds? That will come back, that will come after we talk about awarenesses near the end of the text, but we can talk about it now. What are expressive sounds? If I say squirrel, if I say bridge, if I express some sound which indicates it has a meaning. So expressive sounds are those sounds that possess a meaning, or you could say articulate sound. Okay, they articulate something, so they are indicating a meaning. If you just say maybe you're intending to mean something, like you are just babbling at me or you're making fun of someone. But generally, say for instance, the trees, the sound of the trees moving in the wind. You ever hear that? Is that an articulate sound? Does that articulate a particular meaning? In the pure realms, all those sounds are articulate sounds because they're the emanations of the omniscient mind that has created that pure realm, and they are maybe teaching you impermanence or something like that. But generally in the world, ordinary world, the sound of rocks falling, water cascading over a waterfall, or the trees, and so forth, they are not articulate sounds. They're not subjects in that they have an object. But articulate sounds, because they're uttered by living beings, they do have objects that they are referring to. So Stephen, you have a nice yellow hand that I can see there.
Thank you, Venerable George. So it seems to me then that articulate sounds are permanent objects. Can I say that?
No, articulate sounds, because they're sounds, they would be impermanent. Not all, yeah, and even the sounds of rocks falling are impermanent, but they're not articulate or they're not expressive because they don't express a meaning, like, store or coffee. You don't say coffee, even
Well,
if
yeah,
I just say that one word, if I look in a certain way and I point coffee to my assistant or something, if I had an assistant, that would mean, articulating that I want to have some coffee, bring me some coffee or something like that. So
yeah, sure. I would agree with, like, a sound is impermanent, but I mean, the key to an articulate sound is that it has a meaning and it evokes a meaning.
yes,
So
it possesses, like when we talked about subjects, that which possesses its respective or its own object. So when I say coffee, the word coffee, or the expressive sound coffee, is connected with its object, actual coffee.
right, but when I say coffee, or I wait a second and say coffee again, it still possesses the same meaning from time to time, does it not?
Yes,
So therefore, is it not
But,
permanent?
if I speak
is it
to,
permanent?
if I speak to someone from I don't know, Uzbekistan, who is not someone involved in the tourist trade, so they don't know English words. If I say coffee, they'll just, you know. If someone speaks Japanese to me, other than one or two words that I might know, it doesn't mean anything to me, right?
Yeah, but that would be, could that not be true for all like conceptual meaning generalities, is that some may import certain meanings for certain cultures or knowledge bases and others may not?
Mental images or meaning generalities are something exclusive to the mind that has them.
Sure.
So expressive sounds, is this count here, or articulate sounds, are motivated by mental images. So we'll come to that later.
Okay.
So at any rate, the main thing here is the divisions. There are, when we talk about subjects, there are three kinds of subjects from this point of view: persons, awarenesses, which is the main subject that we're talking about, and expressive sounds. So I know we said it would be about an hour and a half, but we'll go a little bit longer. Is that okay, Shanka? Yeah. Okay. There's an emoji like that. There's one. Person. With regard to persons, the definition of something's being a person is, you could say, is a rock a person? You say something. A being imputed independence on any of its five aggregates. Actually, the Tibetan here doesn't mean any. It actually means suitable number of aggregates. So like in the formless realm, the person is imputed on just one aggregate, the consciousness. In the form and desire realms, a person is imputed on five aggregates. Although you can argue, as I said before, that you can kind of infer that a person just by seeing or noticing one aggregates, there's their sound or their voice or their appearance in the distance. Self, I, person, and being are synonymous. You can actually say I referring to someone else. You say the I of that person, capital I, not E-Y-E. You could say self, dak. I is what? Did anyone know Tibetan? What is I in Tibetan? Shankar, do you know? Nga. N-G-A, nga. Person is kangsak, or in Sanskrit, parusha. And being, Tibetan, we say kebu, or I can't remember what the Sanskrit is. So self, I, person, and being are synonymous. An illustration of a being who possesses a basis of an illustration is an illustration of a person, a being. Can you say my computer is a being or my car is a being because it is? It bees. What is a being?
No.
Being actually is synonymous with person. So it's kind of strange that it's used in the definition of a person. An illustration of a person is a being who possesses a basis of one of the three realms. What does a basis mean of the three? Well, what are the three realms? Desire realm, form realm, formless realm. What is the basis of one of the three realms? Wouldn't this table in front of me, wouldn't that be a basis?
No.
No. Here it means the basis to impute a person. Okay. What is that? Five aggregates. So in the desire and form realms. In the formless realm, the basis of the person there, the basis of the person, of the being there, is just the mental aggregate. I'm sorry, the consciousness aggregate. Right? So I'm not sure how we doing. Manuel, are you there? You following? Manuel,
Yes, I'm here. Yes.
okay, so does that make sense? Here, we're just giving, in this context, we're just giving the definition and illustrations of persons as to when we're talking about subjects, right? So the persons are subjects, and the definition of a person is a being imputed in dependence upon the suitable number of its 5 aggregates. Here it's, any is maybe not exactly precise. Does that make sense to you? Are you following?
Yes, but yes, I need to listen to it several times, but yes, it makes sense.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I usually have to hear and think about it and read it.
Yes.
They can help one another. You can hear and read and think about it again and again, and then discuss it with other people. Like I said before, discussion is very good because although ideally you can kind of look at a subject from all different angles with your mind, generally when we think about something, we have an idea about it, we're looking at it from one point of view. When you discuss it with others, if I say it's this way, and Nadine said, well, what about this? And Christine says, well, what about that? And Charmaine says, what about that? Yarbel says, what about this? It causes you to look at things in ways that you might not ordinarily think of and to understand it better. So it's good to be able to come to the discussion. So an illustration of a being, an illustration, here it says, is, that means an illustration of a person is a being who possesses a basis of one of the 3 realms. That means someone who has aggregates appropriate to label a person in one of the 3 realms. Okay, more or less okay? So again, I'm going to say one more thing here. I'm just going to introduce awareness here. Awarenesses, that's the second outline of subjects. That's the main topic we're dealing with. With regard to the second division of subjects, awarenesses, there are 2 parts, definitions and divisions. First, the definition of an awareness is a knower. Okay.
Incontrovertible knower.
No, incontrovertible knower would be like a realizing consciousness. Consciousness does not have to realize its object. Incontrovertible or infallible is an attribute of something that realizes its object. Now, all consciousnesses don't have to realize their objects. Say, for instance, a doubt. Is a doubting consciousness a consciousness, Yarbo?
Yes.
Does it realize its object? Like say, maybe reincarnation, past lives exist, past and future lives exist. Maybe they don't exist. I don't know. Has that realized its object? Past and future lives?
It hasn't realized the object, but it is a consciousness.
Right, but is it incontrovertible with respect to its object? Incontrovertible means it has eliminated all, let's say, controversy or doubt. No, it's not. So not all consciousness is, sorry, I interrupted you. Say again?
I would say no then on what you just said there.
Yeah, so it's not necessarily incontrovertible. A consciousness is a knower, something that knows something. If you know something, It doesn't necessarily means you know it correctly or infallibly, but it does know something, okay? The definition, so first, the definition of an awareness is a knower. The definition of a consciousness, even though consciousness and knower and awareness are synonyms, they have their own definitions. The definition of a consciousness is that which is clear and knowing. Okay, so this is the famous definition. In Tibetan, we say, Sel Shing Rikpa. Sel means clear, Shing means and, Rikpa means knowing. Consciousness is that which is clear and knowing. So the clarity here refers to a little bit, in one sense, it refers to the clear light nature of the mind that we've been meditating on in the beginning of our motivations at the beginning of the class. Consciousness is clear in that particular sense. I don't have, well, let's say, I don't have crystal here, but let's say the plastic lid of my mug. Would you say that's clear? It's not opaque, doesn't have a, you know, as an example, if this were crystal or a lens of a telescope or something, is a crystal clear?
Relatively.
Pardon? Relatively, right?
Yeah.
It's not exactly the clear that's meant here. It's not exactly, not at all the meaning clear, but you could say it's clear, but is the lens of a telescope or, you know, a big crystal that your mom bought to hold down some papers, or, you know, some nice little bunny that's on her end table, crystal, is that knowing?
No.
Does it know? Some people might think it does. Some people might think that rocks know or are aware or realize, but from Buddhist perspective, they are not knowing. So they certainly don't fit, even if you accept that they're clear, which is not the same clarity that's referred to in this definition. They are not knowing, so they're not consciousness. That which is clear and knowing. Awareness, in parentheses there it says BLO, it's pronounced low, like in low rig, that's the low of low rig. Awareness, knower, Rikpa, like low rig, and consciousness, Shepa, are synonymous. In the reason that there are three different words here, I mentioned in the last talk, low is, what is it in Sanskrit, Shankar? Mati? I think Mati, right? Rikpa, come in?
For awareness?
For awareness, yeah.
Yeah, probably. I've heard it in that sense, but I don't know if that's a classic word or not.
So in this text, which some of you have, very, very good text for these fine points. I think Lati Rinpoche mentions, anyway, I'll find out later. So these three come about because in India, various philosophical or religious schools had ideas that these words in Sanskrit were slightly different. They meant slightly different things. Shankar?
It's buddhi.
Oh, buddhi, awareness, low. Buddhi, vijnana, and so forth refer to slightly different things in their philosophy. Here in Buddhism, they're referring to the same thing. There's not this, like say for instance, in the West, people talk about mind and spirit, right? Have you heard of that? Christianity or other things, soul, all of these things have slightly different ideas. meanings. From a Buddhist point of view, consciousness has this same quality, whether it be sense consciousness or mental consciousness, that it all has the same quality of being clear and knowing. And just to finish on page 10, because next time we'll continue after that. When awarenesses or consciousnesses or knowers are divided, because they're all synonymous, there are valid cognizers and non-valid cognizers. Here, again, the choice of words is arbitrary. We could say there are pramana, which is a Sanskrit word, which is translated here as valid cognizer, and non-valid cognizers, those that are not pramana. Pramana is the word that's talked about when we talk about valid cognition, pramana, in the title of the text. So before we end, any questions? I think Charmaine have a question? No. Oh, Christine.
Hi, Venerable George. Yes, I'm curious why they use the word possess, object possessors, as opposed to conceivers. Or the possess it's such a strong word. And do you have any idea about why they use that word?
Yeah, the Tibetan word is chen. Like, say, for instance, when we talk about sentient beings, have you heard that expression in Buddhism? We talk about sentient beings, mothers, sentient beings. So sentient being in Tibetan is sem chen, or mind possessor. Sentient, like rocks are not sentient beings because they don't have mind. They don't possess mind. You could say have instead of possess. So subjects have their own objects. Here, possess in the sense that if you just have object, maybe it sounds like it's kind of not as connected as possess, that which has or connotes or possesses its own object. Okay, consciousnesses possess their objects in the sense of apprehending them.
Just a very strong. Yeah, I see.
Could be. Yeah. You could say have. Can you? How about if I said subjects are that have their own objects? Would that sound a little less? Yeah. You could. So when you understand a subject well, like say even the ritual texts that the sadhanas that you read, right. Once you know the actual meaning correctly, you can use words of your choice that bring up the correct mental image. Like I jokingly, or maybe not so jokingly, criticize some of the choices of words here.
Okay.
So when you understand, but it's not just something arbitrary. Oh, I don't like that word. I'm just going to choose my own. You know, it may not, the word you choose may not be a good fit for the real meaning of that. So once you understand a subject, you can rewrite your texts and your sadhanas in the terminology that resonates with you. Say, for instance, in Buddhism, when we talk about confession, one of the 7 limbs, right? You know, the 7 limb puja, prostration, what is it? Offerings, confession, rejoicing, requesting the Buddha to remain, imploring them to turn the wheel of Dharma, dedicating 7 limbs. So confession to some people who have a background in Catholicism or maybe something else sounds, oh, no, I don't like that word, you know, that has some connotation. It's loaded, you know. Right. So you have to understand the meaning. Then you can choose your own. You know, you can say revealing instead of confession. Revealing to your own mind, making obvious, not obscuring that you've created negative karma.
Okay.
Or, you know, enunciating negative karma. You know, that I have done that, and so forth. So here possess has pretty, not too bad. It may sound strong to you, but so subjects are those phenomena that have their own respective objects, that possess their own particular objects. Okay. Anyone else have an itch they can't wait to scratch till next week? Okay, so let's dedicate do a short dedication of the merits that we've created. Sit comfortably, relax your mind, and remind yourself that we have created some virtuous karma. Because mentally, we, at the beginning of the class, we tried to create a motivation of bodhicitta, that we were going to do this action of listening to teaching, participating, for the end purpose of achieving enlightenment for the sake of others. We've created an immense amount of merit, maybe more than some people create their entire life in just this one little period. So this is something very useful because it will bring about something comfortable in the futures. It will ripen upon our own aggregates as something pleasurable, or as a rebirth, which is not necessarily, just rebirth is not necessarily pleasurable. It will bring about something positive like that in the future. So to dedicate it to the end goal will ensure that it is that karma, the karmic imprints are not dissipated in just one event in the future, one pleasurable event, but they will continue until we reach that goal. Due to these merits, may I quickly become an enlightened being that teaches others, a guru Buddha. And as a result of that, set every sentient being, without exception, even my enemies, strangers, into that very same state. That's the main meaning of dedication. And Shankar, you have an observation?
Venerable George, I just want to remind you, you said that you might want to do the praises to Manjushri before class. I just wasn't sure if you meant to do it or you wanted to do it. Yeah.
I was distracted.
Okay.
But we didn't know.
Maybe next time
we will do most of the time, but sometimes if we forget, don't think that, oh, the class was a failure because we didn't say the praise to Manjushri. But it's nice to make that connection with the omniscient mind. The definitive Manjushri, again, I mentioned before, means the mind that realizes the ultimate nature of phenomena, actual wisdom consciousness. The interpretive Manjushri is that mind emanating in a particular form that's evocative of that wisdom, like the youthful being holding a wisdom sword in the Prajnaparamita text. That is called the deity Manjushri. So again, sometimes we'll do verbal prayers. Today, let's leave it at that, as I've gone over quite a bit. And thank you very much. Hope to see you again next week. Take care.
Thank you very much.
And